So welcome to the Jason Boull Travel Podcast, and I'm joined here today with Adam Hanmer, and he's with Discover Canada. Welcome, Adam. Can you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Hi, Jason. Yeah. Well, my name's Adam Hanmer. I work for Destination Canada, so we're the tourist board. So we promote Canada, as we say, from coast to coast to coast. Got 3 coasts. I've been doing the job 11 years, been lucky enough to go 25 plus times. So excited to be here today with you to share a little bit of my knowledge and passion on Canada, and hopefully getting you booking a holiday with Jason to Canada.
So out of all the provinces that you haven't been to so far, kind of what's a favourite that resonates with you?
Well, I mean, it's hard to have favorites, kind of like your children, but it's just different, So if you go to the East Coast, what a lot of people don't know is you can get to Canada in 5 hours. So there's a flight with WestJet from Gatwick to St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador.
Yeah.
And St. John's is a great, fascinating city. It's a small city where there's some real kind of Celtic roots out there. And you could go there in the summer and you could do whale watching, see humpback whales and see icebergs as well. And then, that was kind of a recent, really impressive experience. A lot of people want to go to the Rockies. This is a lake behind me in BC, and you get the lakes, these sort of beautiful as a blue. And so that trip to the Rockies is really popular. Maybe taking a train travel is really on trend right now and popular. So we've got various different trains. We've got the Rocky Mountaineer, which is really popular, which takes you from Banff and Jasper through to Vancouver, and also the Via Rail, which is our national rail service. And then, British Columbia as well. I love the wildlife is a big draw in Canada, and there you get to see bears and whales. Vancouver's the main city, but you've got resorts like Whistler that you might have heard of. But really, the best way to get around Canada is to self-drive and get a car. So if you can drive in the UK, you can drive in Canada. So that's always probably my recommendation to people, is to do a self-drive trip, which Jason can book up for you and get you stopping at all the right places.
You kind of mentioned the Rocky Mountaineer there, and my mother went out last year actually, and she did that trip across and stopped in Banff and so forth, and then she added the Alaska cruise on the end of it as well, which was an awesome trip. The whole thing was fantastic.
Yeah, the cruise is really popular as well. Particularly, I think something like 70% of people on Rocky Mountaineer are doing an Alaska cruise, pre or post. There's also cruising in East Canada as well. So you can cruise up from Boston and New York, which comes around the Maritimes and goes down the St. Lawrence River and ends up at Montreal. So that's another cruising option. And then we do have some kind of more kind of adventure cruising options that head up to the Arctic. But Alaska cruise, I've not done it. I'm told it's one of the best cruises out there, and there's lots of different ways to do it in terms of which ship you want to do, whether it's larger or small. So if you like cruising, that trip, flying into Calgary, seeing the Rockies, Rocky Mountaineer to Vancouver, some time in Vancouver in the cruise is a great trip.
Yeah, excellent. Because you're based in the UK, aren't you? So how's the UK travel perception kind of changed, I think, with Canada over the last kind of few years?
Well, I mean, I don't know how much it has changed, to be honest. I mean, Canada's, I guess, and I don't want to get political, but it's been in the spotlight recently with Mark Carney as the Prime Minister now. They've just had the G7 in Kananaskis, which is in the Rocky Mountains. So hopefully you saw like a lot of those amazing backdrops, which is in the Rockies. But I think there's always been a desire for the Brits to go to Canada. We're the second biggest market to Canada outside of the US. So we send this year hopefully close to 900,000 Brits go to Canada. So it's always popular. I think I always like to sell Canada as a kind of, particularly the East Coast, as mid-haul. Like I said, you've got that flight to St. John's in 5 hours, Toronto's 7.5, 8. So it's not actually, it's actually a little bit closer than people think. Yeah. Obviously they speak English. They're super hospitable, the Canadians, very friendly. You get a really good service. The food's excellent. And like what people really want to, are going to see Canada for is kind of what's behind me is the national parks and the great outdoors. But the cities are also worth spending some time in. We've got some phenomenal cities: Toronto, Vancouver, some of the smaller ones like Halifax. Definitely worth a couple of nights. So don't just fly in and get out. There's plenty to see there, and they're sort of positioned as cities on the edge of nature, really. So it doesn't take long for you to get out into some of the national parks.
Yeah, I was. You kind of touch on Toronto there, and I recall I was at one of your training events not that long ago, and the one thing that I was totally surprised about was how Toronto is a major foodie place to go and visit, and the amount of Michelin star kind of restaurants that they have out there was really a big surprise to me.
Yeah, the food scene has really grown. They do the kind of whole, farm to table. That's a big thing. The food is phenomenal. So, I think Toronto is great because it's a bit like London. It's very multicultural. There's almost more people born outside of Canada than inside Canada. If you like sort of lobster and shellfish and seafood, like the maritime provinces are really good for that. Quebec itself is really good on food. But then it's interesting, like places like Vancouver, like if you like sushi, it's probably some of the best sushi in the world because they get amazing salmon. But yeah, there's quite big Asian links with Vancouver because it's obviously on the Pacific. So yeah, Michelin has recently come to Canada. I think, like being honest, probably most of us aren't going to be eating in Michelin star restaurants, or maybe once. But you can eat really well. Not so much on a budget, but like Vancouver's got like this amazing mix of food trucks, and you can probably go and spend $15, maybe £9, and get a really good sort of plate of food for lunch and stuff. So yeah, it's not all about the Michelin star dining, but I think the food is really fresh and authentic. And also, like, Canada has great wine. So I didn't realize before this job, they grow quite a lot of wine. So that's in the Okanagan, which is British Columbia, and then in Niagara as well. So Niagara is known for the falls, but also it's where they grow the wine as well. So yeah, and then if you like beer, there's loads of brew pubs and stuff as well. So yeah, it's you'll eat well in Canada.
Yeah, you mentioned beer, and on the training day again, there were several things on there that really struck me about how it would be a fantastic kind of Oktoberfest comparison. Because over here we go out to Berlin and so forth, and for a few extra hours you can make a really good kind of stay with the beer festivals. You have a lot of beer festivals out there, don't you?
Yeah, there's a lot of beer festivals, a lot of kind of what they call over there brew pubs. Where you kind of essentially they're brewing their own beer and then they're serving it in the pub. So yeah, there's lots of there's tons of beers and spirits as well. Actually, whiskey is like winning awards now. I think it's quite interesting recently. Some of these sort of global whiskies have been taken on the Scottish malts, and Canada does really well on that as well. So yeah, there's something for everyone, but also there's plenty of kind of non-alcoholic drinks as well. So yeah, you'll be fine.
Yeah. How many people kind of see Canada as a like wilderness, a wildlife kind of place? Kind of what hidden, unexpected sides? We covered food off, and we covered the beer stuff. Kind of what else to say to people? I think it's just like a big wilderness place. Kind of what else have we got there?
Well, yeah, like I said, the cities are really impressive. Like Vancouver, particularly. I think being a city on water and kind of with the mountains, it's particularly stunning. So yeah, all the cities are definitely worth. If you're in Vancouver, it's a really cool, fun thing to do is rent a bike and cycle around Stanley Park, which is the park which is in Vancouver itself, or you can walk around it as well if you're not up for sort of cycling. So yeah, I'd say the cities, just to kind of get that sort of that foodie experience. I think you have to be careful saying wilderness because I think sometimes it feels like you're in the middle of nowhere and it scares people off. But we do have wilderness, and that is there. But most of the sort of trips that you'll be booking is civilization is not far away. So yeah, it's. I think the other thing that people probably don't know about is the Indigenous culture. So Canada has a huge history. of Indigenous people that obviously have been there since time immemorial. And there's a real mix across Canada. So you've got the Inuit who live in the Arctic up in the north. So obviously we've got some of the biggest bit of Arctic in the world. And then you've got what we call the First Nations, and that can be tribes across Canada and very different from east to west, and some of them quite similar to the US counterparts. And then you've got the Métis people, and the Métis essentially, what happened when the British and Scottish people came over for the first time, and they were on the sort of trade route with the trapping fur, and that was big business. They kind of met up and paired off with the Indigenous people, and then that became the sort of Métis people. So the Métis are very proud people, and they're now sort of third, fourth generation. So it's a real mix, but that Indigenous, and that's something that we're really interested in, is Indigenous tourism, which is growing. The opportunity really to experience some Indigenous tourism is really to kind of go to sort of a tourism product that's owned by someone who's Indigenous. So, for example, one of the best things I think you can do in Canada is go to one of the wilderness wildlife lodges, which are generally in British Columbia off Vancouver Island. Now you go to this place, it's a floating lodge kind of in the middle of nowhere, essentially. And it is wilderness. Sometimes you fly in a float plane, or you go in a boat, and it's beautiful. And some of these are owned by Indigenous people. So you get the Indigenous guides, and they just tend to have a bit of a deeper sort of connection with the earth and with the wildlife. So I'd always recommend searching that out. So yeah, but this simple, even like in Stanley Park, like I said, where you go for your cycle ride, there's a whole kind of lot of totem poles there, which is always quite a popular photo stop there. So you can sort of dip in and out of it, but it's something that hopefully you'll discover and enjoy learning about.
So we've talked a little bit about the East Coast and the West Coast. Tell us kind of what makes up the middle of Canada. What's going to be between those two areas?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, to be honest, the middle is a bit less traveled, really. You've got Manitoba and Saskatchewan, which are kind of the prairie provinces. One way to see them, if people love train travel, is the Canadian. So this is our famous train, which is run by Via Rail, which takes 5 days, 4 nights, and goes from Toronto to Vancouver. It also goes through Jasper and the Rockies. So that's an option, and then you can see the prairies on the train. So that's one opportunity. Manitoba, I'm kind of recently back from. Manitoba is really, in tourism right now, famous for the polar bears. So up in the north is a place called Churchill, and I don't know whether, hopefully some of your clients watch Race Across the World. I mean, I love that show, and the Canada one was particularly great. And if you remember, they went up on the train to Churchill. So Churchill is where the polar bears gather, and you go to see them in August and October, November. But I mean, being realistic, it's quite an expensive price point. But if you like wildlife, it's definitely worth it. And then Saskatchewan really is famous for ranching. So again, Canada's got a lot of horse riding opportunities and ranching, and particularly in Alberta as well. And there's some great ranches in Saskatchewan. It's also home to the Mounties. People like to get a picture with a Mountie in Canada. In Regina, it's where they train. There's some Mountie experiences. So that's probably the middle. I mean, there's also Northern Canada as well. Northwest Territories kind of in the middle. And people don't really realize about Canada's great for Northern Lights. So Yellowknife, which you can get to from Toronto on an Air Canada flight, has something like 220 nights of the year Northern Lights. So
wow.
People don't always think about Canada for Northern Lights. They think of Iceland, where actually it's quite a slim chance of seeing them in Iceland, as is what I'm told. And they've obviously built a great tourism industry around it. And the Yukon is also, and Churchill, well, I said the polar bears, you can see Northern Lights there. The Yukon as well. The season runs sort of September, October, right through to April. So I would say, actually, if you've got clients who've got time and they're on the West Coast, you could always go up to Whitehorse, which is a 2.5-hour flight from Vancouver, and add a Northern Lights viewing package on for 3 nights. And fingers crossed, there's a chance you'll see the Northern Lights. So again, yeah, Northern Lights is something to look out for.
Absolutely, yeah, it's good to know. I also learned something on the previous travel roadshow we did. about normal bears and polar bears, and there's a very, very unique bear that they've made up there, isn't there?
Well, there's the Komodo spirit bear, yes, which is kind of like an albino bear, which lives in the Great Bear Rainforest in northern British Columbia. And yeah, it's like a blonde bear. It's quite something, quite rare to see. But again, I was telling you about those indigenous owned experiences. Spirit Bear Lodge, so the indigenous people call it the spirit bear. I think scientifically it's called a Komodo bear. But yeah, that's the place to go to see spirit bears. And yeah, I mean, to be honest, the wildlife viewing is really quite special in BC as well. You can see orcas in Victoria. There's a resident pod in the summer. And then, yeah, you've got humpbacks and lots of other different species of whale, and the bird life as well. You've got eagles. There's also like sea porpoises, otters, which are really quite interesting. So yeah, there's lots to see on the wildlife front, and it really is quite wow.
But it also struck me when I was out when I was at the training about how many outdoorsy kind of experiences there are to go and do. And there's so many different opportunities wherever you are across the whole of Canada, really, to get out and explore, do it as an active lifestyle. Which lots of people are looking for wellness breaks, are looking for activity breaks, are looking to get out and keep themselves fit and not just go somewhere and drink all the time. So it seems that there's just an endless supply of opportunities there.
There is definitely. I think, there's loads of really good hiking. You can rent bikes. It's obviously skiing in the winter, some of the best skiing in the world. But also, I think, when I look at a lot of the clients that go to Canada, I think, we have to kind of be realistic, and it's, soft adventure. So, if you can also just go to Banff and go up the Banff gondola, and there's a little walk around the top there. And so, yeah, so you can kind of mix and match. You can kind of go and do some fairly hardcore hiking, or you could just do sort of fairly gentle walks and just kind of go up and see the views and stuff. So yeah, in that sense, it caters for everyone.
So tell me, kind of back to one of your trips. What was one of your most favourite trips, most memorable experiences for you in Canada so far?
Well, I think it was probably my first one, and I was telling you about these wilderness wildlife lodges. Is when I went to Nemo Bay, which is probably one of the more luxury ones. So you might have to save up for it. But yeah, it was pretty magical. I still remember it, 1st of June 2014. The day we ended up, they got a helicopter there. So we went up and did this heli hike. And then we dropped down and had this amazing picnic. And then the boat picked us up. And then often you view bears from the boat. And we saw like this mother and cub bear. We saw like probably about 100 dolphins. We saw a whale. We saw eagles, all in the space of 2 to 3 hours. And then we came back to the dock, and then there's a lovely like fire pit outside on this dock. And we had a little drink, and then we had this amazing meal. And then, the dark skies in Canada, I think we're all kind of used to, well, unless you live properly in the sticks, there's lots of light pollution in the UK, isn't it? It's quite hard to get away from it. But yeah, that's one thing in Canada. They have these dark sky preserves. And, you kind of think, oh, well, what's the dark sky? It's not much. But actually, it's really, really wow. Like just to have that no sort of human made light, and just you see the stars, and if there's a space station going around, you see that and stuff. So yeah, so I'd probably say that was one of the best. I mean, I saw the polar bears as well, which was amazing. And I have done a couple of really cool snowboard trips as well. And yeah, and I did I learned to kayak as well, which was really memorable. So yeah, too many to talk about. But yeah.
Fantastic. So if we look at kind of families, what's kind of the best experiences and the best kind of areas, or any even like hidden gems for them, really?
Well, I think one thing to consider as a family is an RV, which we kind of know as a motorhome. They call them RVs. It's sort of American. And that is a great way to travel as a family. And, you can do, well, whatever trip you want to, you might look at doing that Rockies trip. I mean, there's some cool stuff for kids. Like, so if the drive from Lake Louise to Jasper is called the Icefield Parkway, and it's stunning. And about halfway up, a bit further, there's the Athabasca Glacier. and then you basically they have these huge vehicles with big wheels, and I think they call them ice explorers. And you go up onto the glacier, and you get out on the glacier, and you get a little glass of water. And so that for kids is great. I think all the wildlife viewing is really great for kids. I think the only thing, if you're doing the Bear Lodge experiences, I think you need to be 10, because you kind of need to be able to sit still a little bit and keep quiet. The zip lining, you can do that with the kids in Whistler is really good. They've got zip lining all over. There's some great rafting. My friend Dan, who just went with his kids, Ted, he's only 10, 11, 12. He did a bungee jump and stuff. So,
oh, wow.
There's all that cool stuff, renting bikes, just getting out on the water, whether it's a paddleboard or a kayak. That's what Western Canada probably has a lot going on. And then also, sort of Ontario, you've got Niagara Falls, you've got Blue Mountain, you've got Algonquin, which is a provincial park for wildlife. You've got the Thousand Islands, you've got Ottawa. So yeah, you could do that. And you don't have to do an RV, you could do rent a car as well. So yeah, there's different ways to do it. And then the cities always have, lots going on, like Toronto, going up the CN Tower is really cool. I always recommend people go for dinner if they're going to go there. It's a revolving restaurant at the top. So you don't pay to go up the tower, you just go and have dinner and spend what you would have spent going up on your main course. And then, yeah, like in Toronto, you can easily go to a Blue Jays game, baseball, which is cool. There's hockey if they're in there in the winter, or as they call it hockey, we call it ice hockey. Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot to go at with a family.
The RV thing really appeals to me personally. I did actually look at one a few years ago when I couldn't emigrate out there. We thought, right, we're going to go and do it. But we never actually got round to booking it, which is one of my biggest pet hates about why I haven't done so many things, is because I just didn't actually book it when I should have, and kept putting it off and overthinking it all, really.
Well, yeah, you're still in travel all day. There's so many tempting places to go to.
Yeah. But one of the things we do have is there's a whole range of kind of pre-made itineraries. So, and takes you past all the major things to go and see in those zones, whichever territory you're in. So what are the current travel trends you're seeing for kind of Canada-bound tourism right now at the moment?
I think train travel, as I said, really going through the roof, really, really popular. There's supposed to be a trend for coolcations, so going places a bit cooler. And obviously people think Canada is cold year round. It isn't. I mean, you look at this picture behind me, they get a really good summer, and actually a better summer than we do. I mean, the one thing that seems to be a bit more of a sort of UK trend is multi-generational travel. Okay. And we've been trying to tap into that a little bit and do some marketing, to those trips that maybe grandparents might go with kids and with grandkids. And you can do that in Canada, we've got big cars, and there's different ways to get around. So yeah. And then I think the other one is small group touring. That's becoming more popular, particularly all grown adults to travel independently. So the husband might go off without the wife, or vice versa, and particularly these small groups. There's companies like G Adventures and stuff that have got a good Canada program, that they do very well with women traveling on their own as well. So yeah, I think we're all getting a bit more adventurous and don't feel like we have to travel with another, and you can then be a bit more selfish and just do exactly what you want to do. So yeah, there's a few trends there.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Absolutely interesting. So we hear a lot about sustainability in tourism. Kind of, what's that mean to you, first of all?
Well, it's an interesting one, and I think we have to kind of be honest and say that it's a journey with sustainability. I think you can't get away from the fact that you're flying there, and obviously, as things stand, that with the current fuel and stuff, it's not so good for the environment. But I do, I think there's a few different things to think about, like, if you can go for longer as well, it helps things. What we've done actually at DC, and we've worked on this thing called the Wealth and Wellbeing Index, which, in this kind of climate of, well, certainly we're seeing this with over tourism in Europe and stuff. We certainly don't have over tourism in Canada. It's a big country. But what we are looking at this, we've created this wealth and wellbeing index, and this is really all about Canadians being comfortable with sort of tourism and just making sure they're benefiting from it. So it's not kind of the classic sustainability as such, but we are doing work around this just to make sure communities are supported, and that, you know, looking at the dollars going in the right places. So yeah, I think, you know, in Canada there's certain, you know, some people who do it better than others, but you know, there's also, like, I keep going on about the train, but you know, the train is a very sustainable way to travel. So, you know, I think if you're conscious of your carbon footprint, you know, the train is a great way to kind of feel a bit more comfortable about that. It's a journey, and we're not perfect, but you know, certainly we're trying our best.
Yeah. You actually touched on a really good point there. You said about the over tourism in Europe, and just tying that to what you were saying earlier, also that it's only a 5-hour flight away, you know, to the furthest east point. You know, it's not that far from your 4-hour flight within Europe, and it's a really good alternative option, isn't it, to assist with the over tourism in Europe, and get and see and do something a bit different.
Yeah, and you know, I know, because I mean, I've got a family and 3 kids, and you know, we're going to Greece this summer, and it's, you know, Europe's got really expensive in the summer. I mean, we go to Greece because it's sort of, we find it sort of probably about the cheapest option of all of them. But I think, you know, people are looking at saying, well, actually, I'm not going to spend all that money on going to Mallorca or wherever, you know, and then actually you can now look at sort of long haul options, and you know, certainly Halifax as well, which is the gateway to Nova Scotia, you know, 6-hour flight. So it's definitely worth, you know, considering if you maybe hadn't thought about it before. But yeah, the flying, I always find the flying pretty nice as well. You know, you leave mid-morning, you get there mid-afternoon, you know, watch a couple of films on the flight, and you're kind of there. So, you know, I'm not going to say you won't get jet lag, but yeah, it's actually closer than you think.
So obviously there's some seasonality differences across Canada. There's some very obvious ones that we kind of know about, but how does it really play that much of a difference in how you're planning your trip? So you know, people go and get some winter sun. We're obviously not going to get very much winter sun in Canada. Kind of what do we take into account the different seasons and what we do when we get out there?
Yeah, don't go to Canada for winter sun.
Yeah.
But if you want a proper winter, go to Canada. I mean, you know, the Rockies in winter is phenomenal. And we did a trip actually for some travel agents in March, and they went to the Rockies in winter, didn't ski, and had a phenomenal time. They did some snowshoeing and some dog sledding and some fat tire e-bike riding. So, you know, that's something to consider, like doing that cold holiday. I think if you're a bit more adventurous, I'd just say looking at seasonality, you know, it does depend where you're traveling in Canada. So like if you're going to the Maritimes, or if you're going to Newfoundland, it's quite a short season. So it's kind of like mid-June to mid-September. You don't really want to go outside of that. But that said, you know, we get a really colourful fall. So we get the fall colours, particularly in the east, Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick. And so if you go into October, you'll get those beautiful kind of golden colours. It's quite a short spring in Canada. So, but I always say, you know, if people are asking me when to go, you know, if you're going to BC and Alberta and Ontario, well, particularly BC, Alberta, you know, I think the sweet spot is probably third week in September, around then. So September's still popular. But, you know, if you haven't got kids, you probably want to avoid July, August, and also it's a little bit cheaper. And then, yeah, I think for, you know, October's a great month to go to Ontario, probably the first 2 weeks. And then you get the full colours, but the weather will still be good and you can still do everything. So, yeah, seasonality does come into play. But, you know, I think if you're travelling between June and September, you know, it's a really good time to be in Canada.
Great. You kind of work closely with travel professionals. What would you wish that travellers understood a bit more about Canada?
Well, I think one of the challenges with Canada is, for a lot of people, it's what we call a someday destination. So they're like, you know, I tell people I've got this job, and they're like, oh, you know, I want to go to Canada, or like, you know, what I know I might ask them, oh, you know, have you been to Canada? well, no, but I really want to go. So I think Canada ends up on people's, whether people still have bucket lists, but on their sort of list of places to go. But we never get to number one. So I think for me, it's always like trying to really share the excitement of the things that, because it's really the experiences that sell Canada. It's doing that Rocky Mountaineer, doing the VRL train ride, it's seeing whales for the first time, it's seeing bears, it's meeting an Indigenous elder and hearing their story. You know, it's having an amazing lobster lunch in Nova Scotia. You know, and it's seeing the Northern Lights for the first time. So it's those kind of magical moments that sell it. So really, for me, and it's probably more your job, Jason, is just try and really kind of, because you will have lots of like hair on the back of your neck going up moments on a trip to Canada. And also, you know, people go and they're like, well, why have it's taken me so long to go? And then they come back, you know, they might do the west and then they'll come back and do the east. So it is, you know, it's quite good for kind of repeat visitation as well. And yeah, you don't have to take 2-3 weeks. You know, you can go to Toronto for a weekend, see the baseball, catch a show, go shopping, go and see Niagara Falls. You know, and actually, you know, we've had a bit of press because New York, you know, I don't like to speak ill of, you know, our friends down south, but, you know, I think, well, you know, everywhere's getting a little bit more expensive, but I know particularly now, you know, sort of those city breaks that people used to do at a drop of a hat in New York, and you know, it's a reasonable price point now, and you can go to Toronto and have not a dissimilar experience. So yeah, something to think about.
Yeah. You say about it's always on somebody's 1 day list, and that's exactly what happened to me. With we were going to go do the RV thing, and then we just, because we didn't book it, we never got around to it. And yeah, I'm absolutely full foul of that.
Yeah, so I think it's just kind of, yeah, get it booked, go. You won't, and that's the big one. You won't, you know, I can pretty much guarantee people have a good time. Like, you know, we don't get many people coming back going, oh, wasn't a great holiday, or, you know, Jason sold me a wrong, and that doesn't happen with Canada. So yeah, I think just have the conviction to know that you'll have one of your best holidays ever.
Yeah, it doesn't also happen that Jason sold him the wrong one either. That one's that one doesn't happen either.
You don't know problem, Jason. Of course you don't.
You brought up something as well about the American side, but it, you know, it's, we kind of need to talk about it a little bit, I think, because it is real out there. And I've been quite surprised with things on the news, and we don't want to get political, but it's absolutely not going to. But there's certainly more of a concern about people, and you can see by the numbers of people traveling out there. So for people that would normally go out to America, let's say they go to New York, or they head over towards a whole kind of Florida, Orlando way. Kind of what else? We obviously don't have kind of Walt Disney up in Canada, but kind of what else do you have there that people should come and try Canada with, who would have done an American trip, but now they may be thinking twice about it? So kind of what do we say to those people?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's a good point, and there's been quite a lot of press on this. So yeah, swap New York with Toronto said about that. You know, if you're going to Maine or New Hampshire, go to the Maritimes, go to Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, PEI, and you get that beautiful, similar experience with the food and friendly people and just beautiful landscape. You know, if you're going to go and do a self-drive in California, you go and do it in BC. You know, obviously it's slightly different weather, but, you know, in terms of like national parks and what you'll see and be wowed by, you'll get that. Yeah, I mean, we can't compete on Disney, and I think, you know, if people want Disney, you've got to go to Florida or Paris. So, you know, I think, but yeah, I mean, it does feel a bit of a shame. I mean, you know, we're not really celebrating things at the moment. You know, I feel like for us to do well, the US needs to do well as well. So, it's definitely been a little bit challenging. But yeah, I think also like America has some great ranching product, and I was chatting with someone the other day that is now set up some Canadian ranching product, because we again have really good ranching product for those that want to go and do that ranch experience and ride. So yeah, I think, you know, there's quite a lot of stuff, you know, you could do, and it just, if it's a, you know, reason to kind of get you think about Canada where you haven't before, then go for it. I think yeah, I mean, the big one also is, the Canadian dollar is actually quite weak. So, it fluctuates, but it's not far off 2 to 1 right now. When I went last month, it was 1.9. I think it's 1.8, 1.85 at the moment. But actually, your pounds do go quite a long way right now as well. So, and certainly, I think I've not been to the US for a while, but certainly probably go a little bit further than the US. And I know we have the tipping culture in Canada, so that's quite similar as well. But I think it's that we do it slightly different in Canada. So I know it's kind of pretty much expected in the US. But yeah, so yeah, I mean, I think I don't like to speak the US down, and actually people do dual vacations as well. If you're going to Seattle and Vancouver, Victoria, it's very close there. So you can still do that very much so. But yeah, it's worth, if it gets Canada on your radar, then that's great for us.
Yeah, and I completely agree. We're not into talking ill of America at all. It's just these are currently real concerns on people's minds. And as travel professionals, we're here to help people, to guide them to the best decision they can make. I can't wait for things to improve, and everybody feel a lot more confident about it, because you can do multi destinations, being New York and Toronto and those other ones. So yeah, it's cool. Hopefully it sorts itself out soon. So for somebody who's listening now, and they've now got Canada on the brain, they maybe haven't considered it before, or they have considered it and now you've kind of convinced them that it's absolutely where they need to go. What's kind of the for their first step, we're saying, planning their journey? Where do they all start out to get this done?
Call you, Jason.
Call me. Completely agreed.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, Jason will put it together, and he'll work with his people to kind of get you that right itinerary. But yeah, you just need to come really with idea on how long you've got, when you want to go, and then roughly what you want to experience. But I think narrowing it down, and that's one of the challenges of Canada, because it's quite big. Really, most people are looking at that sort of Rockies, British Columbia, Vancouver as their first trip, or they're going into Toronto and doing Niagara and going maybe up to Quebec as well, seeing Montreal, Quebec City. So those are the two. That's probably where you need to think about for your first trip. And then it's just a case of, how do you want to get around? Do you want to drive? Do you want to get the train? And then your budget level, because we can do 3-star, we can do 5-star. So again, it just depends on what sort of price point you want. But I'd say the one advice I would give is not to bite off too much with Canada. Sometimes you get people wanting to do east and west in a 2-week trip, and I think that's crazy. So I'd say you really need. It depends how you do your holidays. You can go for shorter, but I would try and go for 2 weeks. I think, and we find, actually, if we look at the tour operators I work with, their average stay is probably 16, 17 nights. So people do go for longer, and if you have got longer, I really would. But yeah, hopefully there's some sort of thoughts there. But yeah, it's really probably base it around what you want to experience, that we've spoken about today, and then Jason can design an itinerary for you.
We kind of talked about itineraries previously, and I was really quite surprised by all the things off piste that you don't normally come across and see that are built in these itineraries. And there's some real gems up and around Niagara, kind of coming away from Niagara Falls. There's some little things just down the road a little bit, which are just fantastic. And there's loads of those little kind of gems, as we say, all over the place. And I think if you just do a few searches, or you go off what you know, I think you'll miss an awful lot out. And I definitely think it's one of those places you want to work with a travel professional to do it. Me, or whoever your travel professional is, just want to get the right advice before you go. I think that's really, really important for people, because there is so much more there than you ever think there is. So
yeah, I mean, that is also my advice, is don't book with an OTA unless you really know it and know what you're doing. It's impossible to get the sort of 2-week multi-destination trip booking online. So and that's why I'm here to, I work with people like Jason and travel agents and tour operators, and we've always done, because Canada's a complex destination, so you need someone to hold your hand. So yeah, I'd totally recommend booking with a travel agent.
Cool, awesome. Well, Adam, thanks for joining us today. It's been a real good kind of overview of Canada. I really appreciate your time. I hope everybody's got something out of it. If you do have any more questions at all, then please feel free to get in touch. We can always get back in contact with Adam with any deep dive questions if you have any. But Adam, thanks a lot for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jason. It's been really good. Really enjoyed it. So yeah, make your next holiday Canada, please. Thank you.
Cool. Cheers, Adam.
Bye.